I started out on Burgundy, but soon hit the harder stuff. Everybody said they'd stand behind me when the game got rough. But the joke was on me, there was nobody even there to bluff. Hey, you're listening to Trigger Warnings, challenging talk radio featuring John Ross and Chris Smith. I'm Chris Smith, and this is Bob Dylan's Banjo, and it's an all-star, star-spangled Bob Dylan tribute show hour
And this
today.
week, and I think it's safe to say that this week it is not challenging talk radio. It is celebratory talk radio.
Oh, I'm sorry. There is no more challenging speech in this country than Bob Dylan.
Well, when I shared the news with you, was it Wednesday morning? I believe it was Wednesday, that Bob Dylan had won the Nobel Prize. Not only was it kind of a shock for both of us, and I'm not sure either of us initially believed it, but for me, it was such a sense of joy and relief because, as you know, I'm a political junkie. I love politics. I even did a political event, a nonpartisan political event here in Chicago this week that was very successful, and it had, two political candidates who were very articulate and intelligent and knowledgeable and civil and all that, and it restored my faith in democracy. But even with that, this election season is so awful, so throw up in your mouth every day awful, and I can't wait for it to end. That the Dylan announcement was such a breath of joy and a relief of fresh air. And so I think, and as you suggested, that this is very appropriate that we are doing this, that we are dedicating this hour to Bob Dylan and that piece of news.
Yes, it's the Bob Dylan Rhetorical Analysis Power Hour featuring John Ross and Chris Smith here on Trigger Warnings, what is known to be challenging talk radio. And this will still be challenging talk radio. And I'm not kidding when I say Bob Dylan has been, throughout his career, some of the most challenging speech available, right? And maybe that's the most interesting thing about Bob is his acceptance in the mainstream. And it seems like an entire generation has followed along with his different manifestations, right? I mean, John, have you at any point been a Dylan fan?
Oh yeah, I've been a Bob Dylan fan for quite a while, because I just have. The thing about him is that he is. I mean, this is the way I put it. This is going to sound unflattering. He has a bad voice. You can't, many cases, understand what he's saying. Yet he knows how to sing, and he is a brilliant writer of music and capturer of sentiment through beautiful poetic language and expression. And maybe that's why, to me, now this does not include Present Company, which we'll get to in a minute, but to me, that's why nobody can cover a Dylan song like Dylan.
You mean Present Company like this banjo?
Well, you have thrown down the gauntlet on me to challenge my sentiment that nobody, and let me back up. I know that to an artist, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. That it's a great compliment when a lot of people cover your songs. I mean, you look at some of the, I was just looking at some of the songs that we were going through, and you look at how many people have covered his songs. I mean, people like Billy Joel have covered a lot of Dylan songs, and that's a great compliment. But nobody, at least to this moment, to me, has done that, can do a Dylan song like Dylan. And you and I were talking the other day, and we talked about this before, that many, many years ago, Richie Havens, rest in peace, did a wonderful 2-album set covering Dylan and Beatles songs. And And, you know, some of the Dylan songs that he covered I hadn't been familiar with before, and then I became familiar with them. And you know, and I love what Richie Havens did, but nobody doesn't like Dylan. I mean, the Turtles covering "It Ain't Me, Babe." I'm sorry.
Hey, I mean, Billy Joel will cover Bob Dylan, but it does not work in the reverse. There is something about Bob that puts him in a different class of songwriter, and I believe it's his absurdist tendencies and his true street cred that he established for himself in the early 1960s. It was those times that really established him as somebody who could not just match the vocal line to some chords, but also had some statement to make that you needed to hear more than once to understand.
Yeah.
That's why so many people cover Dylan. I mean, people cover Billy Joel, but it's clear, you know, there's no layer of poetic verse, poetic justice, the way Bob envisions it. Why has the world not heard from Bob since he won the Nobel? Where do you think he is?
He's probably touring. Like, I would bet he's touring somewhere because that's what he does.
No, I don't think he's on the road. I mean, if you ask his website, all it says is go buy his latest book. And he's not on the road. I mean, he could be anywhere. Based on the experiences he has documented in his songs, he could literally be anywhere in the world.
I think the reason is that Bob Dylan is not about fanfare. He's not about self-promotion. He's about the work. He's about the art. You know, I think that's who he is. I think he's very modest. I think he's very shy. He's very humble. And the other thing is that he made clear early in his career, and several commentators have shared this over the past few days, that he didn't want to be pigeonholed into any particular musical milieu or political frame. He had messages in his music, but he certainly took on the traditional lefty protest milieu, and he was very clear about that. And I think he's his own person. And so and he's probably quite humbled by this recognition, I would bet, don't you think?
I don't know. Because Bob is somebody that has always pursued the art before he has pursued the acceptance of his audience. Other artists like Steely Dan took that to be, you know, almost a tongue-in-cheek contempt for the audience, in which I'm going to intentionally trick you in this song. And you're just going to play along because the beat is so good. Bob is a slick dude in that respect.
And Bob is in Phoenix, Arizona right now. He has a concert tonight.
He's in Phoenix tonight?
He's on a tour of the Southwest. Phoenix tonight, Albuquerque Tuesday, El Paso Wednesday, Lubbock Thursday, Thackerville, Oklahoma Saturday, at a casino. Tulsa, Shreveport, Baton Rouge, Jackson, Mississippi, Huntsville, Paducah, Louisville, Charleston, West Virginia, Durham, North Carolina. He is touring the Southwest and the Deep South.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Trigger Warnings, challenging talk radio featuring John Ross and Chris Smith, with radical empathy at its core. And in that spirit, we are devoting this show to a discussion of the work and life of Bob Dylan. And I'm finding out cool stuff like Bob's playing Albuquerque coming up.
You're not far away. You are in that part of the world now.
Have you seen Bob Dylan in concert?
I have not, no.
I have. I went and saw Bob Dylan on the green space of Harvard University in the gymnasium, which must have been 10 years ago. And my friend and I marveled that the songs were absolutely unrecognizable. The acoustics were horrific. We had no idea why Bob would choose such a venue. And you know, this old man in a cowboy hat kind of played this very small keyboard mysteriously and swapped guitars and knew what he was doing, but none of us did. So I'm not sure. I don't know. I've heard that his shows are very, very hit or miss.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even his live appearances on TV, I went back and looked at his. I think it was for Letterman's 10th anniversary at CBS. He had this incredible backup. You know, he had all these Grammy-winning singers. I forget who was in it. I think maybe Bonnie Raitt was there. I mean, some really impressive people performing his backup group and a big band, and Paul Schaefer in the world's most dangerous band and all that. And he did Letterman's 10th anniversary, and he did Like a Rolling Stone, and it was unintelligible. He was just running words together, like a verbal constipation, and that's the way he does it. That's the way it's his thing. I don't like that. I love Like a Rolling Stone, and I like it from the original album where he sings it relatively in rhythm with, words relatively understandable, although I must say for years and years I've been singing the wrong words. But he does it even, I think, and I don't know why that is, whether he's making a choice or it's a spontaneous juxtaposition of sounds to words or whatever, but I think that's who he is.
Whoa. Watch the spontaneity there. That song, I mean, I believe that Bob he considers himself a poet to the extent that the words are very premeditated. And as I understand it, he would arrive in the studio, the members of the band were his studio backing band at the time, and brilliantly, Bob has released all of the original recordings from those sessions. So, the recording that you hear on the radio of Like a Rolling Stone was actually recorded in one take across 7 minutes, and the unreleased versions of it came out earlier last year. And it's fantastic to hear.
It was that, what were those? Because I had that whole, I forget what they were called, where they were just the studio.
The bootleg series.
Yeah.
Right?
By the way, I'm looking, there are many seats, not a lot, but, probably 50, 60 seats left.
Oh, I'm on it. If anybody's going to Albuquerque, you can get a ticket to see Bob himself for only $116 and change. I'm sorry. That's not, I could get $116 worth of Bob records, or I might save my money and wait for the next bootleg series, because those releases to me have been better than his studio albums, and that's saying a huge amount. But the day I bought the actual concert and heard the moment he went electric and really ticked off the folk audience that was sitting in front of him, the recording of the Rolling Thunder Revue from 1974, these are not just historic, they are like peaks of performance, and maybe Bob as like a performer, I wish I would have seen Bob with the Grateful Dead on their tour together in 1989. You didn't happen to be there, were you?
No, I was not.
All right.
There are some seats available half of that price at $56 on the wings.
Oh wait, there's seats on the lawn?
No, on the wings. On the far left or far right of stage. There are single seats that you can get for $56. If you're going by yourself, that would be perfect.
$56 to see Bob?
Yep.
All right, the verdict is out. Hey, you can follow us on Twitter and actually chime in. Should I go see Bob Dylan in Albuquerque, New Mexico for $56? Join us on Twitter. Join the conversation at @T_warnings. Join the conversation, right, John? Isn't that what they say?
Well, we could crowdsource your ticket. I mean, I suppose you could go to that level too.
No. I mean, I just want to know the public opinion. I don't trust the polls, but I would trust any random person who told me to go see Bob Dylan.
Well, I've told you that I'm hardly random. I think
You think
you're that.
you think it's a good investment of time and resource?
It's just 3 hours away. You know, it's a moment. The guy's 75 years old. I mean, you know. I'm sure he will be on a stage singing when he dies. But you know, he's 75 years old. It could be any day now. It could be. I mean, I hope he makes it to Stockholm because I think his acceptance speech would be great. Who else has given a Nobel acceptance speech with a harmonica? I mean, really.
When will his Nobel acceptance speech be?
It's always early December.
He's just going to get up and play the harmonica. That's it.
I think that would be very appropriate. Well, I think it's also really notable here as a historical point that this is the first time a musician has won a Nobel Prize, and that this award, whether it's for literature or it's much more so in the humanities, literature, which is the only real Nobel Prize in that world. It is an award bestowed on someone for a lifetime, a body of work. By the count I saw last night, which was 404 songs. And what the Nobel Committee said in giving him the award was he's reinvented and updated an entire realm of American music, and it's not an obscure kind of American music. It's the folk genre that incorporates pop and blues and gospel and church music and white church music and black church music. He is a Renaissance man. He is a serious thinker, a serious intellectual, somebody who has put out work in a lot of different genres, and obviously is self-confident enough to do that and to do it well, and also not to really care if it's commercially successful, because he has had many dabblings that are not commercially successful. What does he care? I mean, there is something admirable.
Yes, there is. You're listening to Trigger Warnings, Challenging Talk Radio, and we've established that Bob Dylan is the Santa Claus of popular culture. He really is. I mean, from the beginning of his career, look at how the culture has evolved. I was talking to a friend of mine about Bob's Nobel, and we were talking about what's been influenced by his songwriting. And to think about it in terms of film, well, anyway, we were making an irrelevant, it was kind of a non sequitur, but without Bob, there would have been no films like Ghostbusters, the National Lampoon series. That sense of parody and that sense of absurd comedy, I don't think would have ever gotten off the ground. You think about the movies that were popular when Bob was sitting in a room writing his songs in the early 60s. You know, that was straight-laced Ozzie and Harriet America. And how the culture has changed. It's truly incredible. He's the man. That's all we need to say.
The week of December 5th that all these awards are given out, specifically there's a concert on December 8th. There's a dialogue. The prize award ceremony is December 10th at 4:30 Stockholm time. So that would be roughly 4:30 p.m. That would be roughly 10:30 Central Time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:30 Mountain Time on December 10th.
If we go to DEF CON 2, will Bob feel like he needs to give the speech early and just maybe do it on YouTube or something?
If we go to DEF CON 2, meaning the United States?
Yes. Not Bob himself. Bob may already be at DEF CON 2.
I don't know, but you might want to try to get media credentials for this. You can do it. There's a page where you can contact the Nobel and try to get media coverage, media accreditation. But
I'm not sure if I have any questions for Bob. I think he's said it all.
No, I think he may give. Well, I don't know. I mean, he may give a very short speech, or he may. I don't know. Should we? Why don't we tell the listeners what you and I have been doing over the past several days in preparation for this show?
Well, I'm not going to get explicit about what I've been doing the last couple days, but I will say, Bob, 75-year-old Bob, will be a coward if he says nothing between now and November 8th. A hard Bob's going to fall. To whom much is given, much is expected. And Bob, if you can hear the sound of my voice, you better speak up or forever hold your Nobel. It really is important. So, you're listening to Trigger Warnings, Challenging Talk Radio. That was my call out to Bob. He better speak up, as should all that participate in this celebritocracy. And that's why John Ross and I are here.
Yeah, and what we've been doing the last 48 hours is we assign ourselves, consistent with our weekly habit of picking 2 articles that we send to each other and talk about and ask questions about. We agreed we would each come up with 2 songs, the lyrics of 2 Dylan songs, and we would read them to each other, or we would read them out loud and discuss them, which I believe we are prepared to do. And let me tell you, this was one of the hardest assignments I've ever had in my life. I actually had to sit here and think on what parameters am I picking this? Am I picking these songs based on my personal experience, how I have related to or used or interacted with Dylan songs for different moments and milestones in my life, which was certainly one important quality. Do I do it based on just the literal literature and rhetoric in it? It was very difficult. But I came up with 2.
So what criteria did you go on? The assignment was we will each choose 2 Dylan songs and provide our loyal audience the experience of us talking about them. And I thought kind of a rhetorical analysis. What did Bob mean? And perhaps we can make ties to the land that we're in and the situations that we're in politically. But did you go with songs that mean something to you, or songs that mean something to the country?
One of the songs I picked has always meant something to me, so I didn't deviate too far on that one. The other one, I looked at it in the context of the pure literal message, and there's not much in that song, in With God on Our Side, there's not much euphemism or interpretation. It's pretty literal. And I thought, in that sense, it was very powerful. A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall is, to me, it's just a beautiful song. There are a couple of lines in it that, in particular, speak to very personal and poignant elements of the human condition that I highlighted. But I could have picked 20 songs, and I must admit I'm not familiar with one of the songs you picked. I went and listened to it, and I said, okay, well, I'm interested in. It sure sounds fun, but other than that, yeah.
Yes, so, later in the show, folks, I will punch myself in the face with my fist. But right now, one of the 2 songs that John picked to discuss here on Trigger Warnings is A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. It's 5 verses, and each verse is of the same construction, and there's subtle changes. Each verse draws on a different one of 5 senses, I believe.
Well, but more or less, right? Yeah.
You want to hear the first verse?
Yeah, I think rather than my narrate the lyrics, I'll let you sing, and then I will speak to the two lyrics in particular that really are compelling to me. So take it away, Bob Jr., Bob 2.0.
Hey, watch it. I'll do the first verse, and then you can talk about what strikes you in it.
Yeah.
Where have you been, my blue-eyed son? Where have you been, my darling young one? I've stumbled on the side of 12 misty mountains. I've walked and I've crawled through 6 crooked highways, stepped out in the middle of 7 sad forests, been out in front of a dozen dead oceans, been 10,000 miles in the mouth of the graveyard. It's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard rain gonna fall.
Excellent.
Where have you been, my blue-eyed son? Where have you been, my darling young one? And then,
what's interesting,
go ahead.
it doesn't necessarily, we don't know if the child is answering the question or if the parent is telling the son where the parent has been. That's a very, is there a dialogue here or is there a monologue? Or is it a rhetorical question? I think that's one of the really interesting things about it. I mean, it certainly, if you look at the lyrics, it looks like a retrospective that the parent, has seen and met and experienced and heard all these things. And it's all a very kind of dystopic world the parent paints here. So I very much doubt that it's, or maybe it's a back and forth, maybe it's maybe one line or 2 lines of the parent and then the child responds. I don't know. I think that's one of the things that's interesting about this is that as so many, this Dylan song in particular to me is that it's kind of a life lesson. Here's what I've seen, but you just experience this yourself and please go and do it. And that there's a lot of pain in life and that, it's okay.
I agree, and I think that's what's remarkable about this song, and something that to me is Nobel Prize winning poetry. It's the 2 questions, as you drew attention to, the 2 questions that begin each verse. Where have you been? What did you see? What did you hear? Who did you meet? And what do you do now? And then there's a number of lines in each verse answering the question, but you don't know if it's the parent or the child speaking. In that first verse, what do you make of the numbers? There's 12 misty mountains, 6 crooked highways, 7 sad forests, dozen dead oceans, 10,000 miles, and a partridge in Bob's hair.
Yeah, well, there might be 12 misty mountains, 6 crooked highways, 7 sad forests. There sure as heck aren't a dozen dead oceans. And so, I mean, to me, there's this sense of fatigue. I've seen a lot of the world, and it feels like this. It feels the agony, the pain I've seen. I mean, I'm jumping out of this stanza, but, he uses a lot of references that there's a lot of polarization in these, where he a little later on he uses language that a child would respond to. I heard the sound of a clown. Oh, a child would respond to that, but the clown cried in the alley.
Hey, here's verse 2. What did you see, my blue-eyed son? What did you see, my darling young one? Saw a newborn baby with wild wolves all around it. Saw a highway of diamonds with nobody on it. Saw a black branch with blood that kept dripping. Saw a room full of men with their hammers a-bleedin'. I saw a white ladder all covered with water. Saw 10,000 talkers whose tongues were all broken. Saw guns and sharp swords in the hands of young children. And it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard, it's a hard rain gonna fall. There's a lot in that. I mean, go ahead.
There's a lot, and there are very few lines in this song that you can imagine seeing literally. You know, a highway of diamonds with no now that's a word picture. But I saw guns and sharp swords in the hands of young children. That is not a word picture. That is something that is very real in this world. It was real when he wrote it. It's real today. And I think, you know, if you are a parent talking to a child, that's a powerful image. Yet it's not an image that you really have to work hard to concoct. You can see images, and you could have seen them 40 some years ago, 50 years ago, when the song was written, of young children holding guns and swords. That to me, and then in stanza 4, there are 2 lines that go back to back that are just such a wonderful, just deep, poignant, bring tears to your eyes. I don't know if you want me to jump to that, but
No, hold on. I think it's worth saying here in verse 2, if verse 1 established this parent-child conversation and we don't know who's actually present for it, verse 2 introduces third parties into that. Outside of the parent and child, there is this third person, this newborn baby, and then there's a room full of men with their hammers a-bleeding, and then there's 10,000 talkers. It's like this influx of people, like the rest of the world will rush into this. And then that line that is really resonant, that ends the verse right before the refrain, I saw guns and sharp swords in the hands of young children. There's so much alliteration and thoughtfulness to the cadence of each one of these lines. I was wondering why there's 7 sad forests and every other line that contains a number is an even number, and there's 7, but I think it's just for the alliteration, or maybe not.
Well, what's interesting is that you're right. Every line that concludes the stanza, and some of the stanzas have 9 lines, and some of them have, the first one only has 7, but the rest of them have 9 until the last one, which goes on and on for 14, almost like a Shakespeare sonnet.
We'll get there. Look out.
But the last line before the verse in every stanza, but the last one is really dystopic. 10,000 miles in the mouth of a grain yard, guns and sharp swords in the hands of young children, until the last one, which is...
Oh, hold on. Here's verse 3.
We're going
to do it all, man. You can't take, we can't jump to the end. What did you hear, my blue-eyed son? What did you hear, my darling young one? Heard the sound of thunder, roared out a warning, roar of a wave that could drown the whole world. 100 drummers whose hands were blazing, 10,000 whispering and nobody listening. One person starved and many people laughing. The song of the poet who died in the gutter, the sound of the clown who cried in the alley. It's a hard rain gonna fall.
Hello.
Hello.
You know, well, there's a wonderful sensual piece to this. I mean, you really are asked to use your senses here to imagine what he's talking about, whether it's something you can literally imagine, like children holding guns, or something that is harder to imagine, like a clown crying in an alley. It is just it does ask of you to use your senses and your imagination. Not even imagination, just senses to see and hear and feel and smell all of these sensations. The other thing I really, and again, this is the Dylan version of it. When he does the verse, he howls. Hard rain, he howls that. It's a plaintive. It's just, I don't know. You know, it's almost a howl of relief, but it's. You know, he just really, maybe that's just what a folk singer. I don't really know, because I'm sure if you listen to 10 different versions of the same song, you would hear him do it 10 different ways, which is typically what he's done. But I don't know. It's just it really does ask you to use your senses.
And I think that, you know, for most people's pop music sensibilities and what jives for their ear, this is why songs like this, though they are works of genius, I would say, it's why Dylan, it's why it leaves some people a really bad taste, because it's a man on an acoustic guitar howling away passionately for what he believes, and it becomes tedious. This song is really long. Even you're trying to jump ahead in the rhetorical analysis, because Bob will, with his idea in mind, beat you over the head with it. You know, there was the mellow as it ever was acoustic version of this. And then he used it in the Rolling Thunder Review to open the show with this like ridiculous big band rock and roll version. And you want some howling, you know, it's like Bob with backup singers. And now I would say the genius of Richie Havens came in his interpretation of Bob's songs. And even now with verse 3, I pulled a fast one and left the word heard off of each one of the lines, because it's cumbersome, maybe intentionally cumbersome, to get all of these words and images at you. You know, if 20th century poetry after T.S. Eliot is supposed to be a heap of broken images, Bob is you know, showing that he's got the chops in this song. Who do you think the song of the poet who died in the gutter is?
I'm not sure the chronology of it. Could have been a lot of people. A lot of poets died in the gutter. He was into the beat poets. So had any beat poets died in the gutter when he wrote this?
Yeah, but you know, I mean, he felt so, the media, for everything I've read about the, oh my goodness, we gave Bob a Nobel, you know, all of the journalism about that, I haven't seen anybody bring up his namesake. The man liked Dylan Thomas.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly Dylan Thomas was clearly how Dylan Thomas died.
Right, so I've always taken that line to be Dylan Thomas, and I haven't seen any of the media draw attention to the fact that, you know, that's the tradition that Bob saw himself in first and foremost. Yeah. And what we can't underestimate is how much of a scholarly endeavor Dylan Thomas took writing a poem. It was all he did, and he didn't pay his bills. He just, you know, drifted around, asking people for money so that he could sit around and write his poems. And I think that Bob has always carried that work ethic with him. It's probably, you know, yeah.
Well, the other thing that I'll point out, and you know, that, again, that could be Dylan Thomas, it could be a lot of people, is that, and I got to this earlier, and it's a compliment to what you said, that, you know, it's hard to get all these words in, that you intentionally left words out. Dylan makes it hard to get all the words in. And that adds to something that I suggested earlier, that he makes it very challenging to listen to his music. He did not write music. I'm thinking here of the, as a testament to someone who's covered him a lot, to Billy Joel's song, The Entertainer, which speaks to, I have to get my song down to 3.5 minutes so it'll get play. Dylan didn't do that. I mean, Dylan said, no, I'm going to do it this way, and I don't care if it gets play, because I know, on commercial radio or on pop radio, I don't care. Dylan is not, and I don't know, I have not looked back at what his play record was back in the 60s, if they were playing 6, 7, 8-minute tracks of his. But he just didn't make it easy for people to listen to his music, difference between hearing and listening. He made it very challenging. He challenges your sense. I mean, this is one of dozens of songs that clearly have a cultural, political, spiritual message. And he said, I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm not going to make it rhyme. I'm not going to have just a few words. I'm not going to make it literal. I'm going to make it hard for you to listen. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to sing it necessarily in the rhythm with how I've written the song, because it's mine. And that's, to really not, he obviously he had been a very significant commercial success. So it's not like I don't imagine him doing anything to dress himself up for the cameras or the radio or anything. He is who he is, and it works. And it works financially, but it works in more enduring ways.
It's funny you should bring up Billy Joel's "The Entertainer." I think we'll get a coda in to this version here, but we got to get through these verses. We got 2 more of them.
We do, and some of us have limited time. It's just I could do this all night.
Who did you meet, my blue-eyed son? Who did you meet, my darling young one? I met a young child beside a dead pony. Met a white man who walked a black dog. Wait a minute. What's up? Is that an outright statement on racism?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, we knew we were going to be doing this, and that line is one of the most challenging of Bob's. I think this song doesn't get played on the radio because of that line. I met a white man who walked a black dog. I'm going to take it to be, Bob's understanding of what was going on in the early 1960s.
Literally, a lot of white people had black dogs. That was the only thing they had that was black that many of them acknowledged. That was the only being they encountered, they acknowledged, or treated with respect.
The rest of the verse is innocuous compared to that line.
It isn't. Oh, no, it isn't. Not to me.
From the top. Who did you meet, my blue-eyed son? Who did you meet, my darling young one? I met a young child beside a dead pony. Met a white man who walked a black dog. Met a young woman whose body was burning. Met a young girl, she gave me a rainbow. Met one man who was wounded in love. Met another man who was wounded in hatred. It's a hard road. I'm gonna fall.
So the lines in this song that hit me and that hit me deeper than any others are the paired lines about being wounded. A man who was wounded in love, another who was wounded in hatred. Boy, does that summarize the human condition. To me. And it summarizes the human condition on a very personal level, on a spiritual level, on a political level. I mean, you could very easily apply those lines, especially the second, wounded in hatred, to so much of what our political system has become, which is people who are legitimately and understandably angry, who feel they've been dealt a bad hand, that the system is cooked. I can't say rigged because I'm tired of hearing the word rigged. Cooked against them, and how they respond to it and how they act out, and how they feel that their only outlet to respond to that is to do so politically, or in actions that they deem political. That to me may be the most poignant line in any song, any song that Bob Dylan ever wrote. To be wounded in love and to be wounded in hatred is powerful.
And the way Bob writes it, he meets one man who was wounded in love, and he meets another man who was wounded in hatred, and this verse is dedicated to not those he heard, like the poet in the previous verse, but these who he met. A young child, white man, young woman, young girl, one man, another man. And the experience of meeting people as individuals is how he came to this understanding of them. That's really profound. I had never taken that couplet to be what you describe it to be. That's great.
And not wounded by love, not wounded by hatred. Wounded in love, wounded in hatred. Very different things. And those are not throwaway preferences. Oh, I'll just stay in. It's easier to sing than by. No. He didn't. That's intentional. To be wounded in love, to be in hatred, are very different than to be affected by them. Very different.
And you're right to point that moment out, because reading this as a poem, there are some say, and Dylan Thomas said it, and I'm sure Bob Dylan believed it at the time he wrote this, you've got to have a turn. And so far, this song has been a listing of what we saw and heard and who we met. And when we get to that image, we get the refrain of the chorus, "A hard rain's gonna fall," and then the fifth verse, which begins very differently. If this is a parent-child conversation going on, the question begins with the fifth verse. "What do you do now, my blue-eyed son? What do you do now, my darling young one? I'm going back out before the rain starts a-fallin'. I'll walk to the depths of the deepest black forests, where the people are many and their hands are all empty, where the pellets of poison are flooding their waters, where the home in the valley meets the damp, dirty prison, and the executioner's face is always well hidden, where hunger is ugly and souls are forgotten, where black is the color and none is the number. And I'll tell it and think it and speak it and breathe it and reflect it from the mountain so all souls can see it. Then I'll stand on the ocean until I start sinking. But I'll know my song well before I start singing. It's a hard rain gonna fall. I only practice this song so much because nobody really wants to hear it. Nobody wants to endure this long Bob Dylan epic,
Yeah.
Five senses, what did you hear, see, and what are you going to do now?
Well, and it is hard to listen to. And I guess the only positive piece that there's more than one, but what he does is he revisits a lot of the places he saw at the beginning. He talks about oceans and mountains and forests, So he does revisit them. And he even arguably makes references to real life situations. You can imagine him in this song, and it's interesting that in the coming weeks he will be in these places. You can imagine him in rural West Virginia or rural Kentucky, coal country, tobacco country. You can imagine him going back to the mountains or the forest, and not oceans. No oceans there, but you can imagine him in the forest, in the mountains of these places, seeing pellets of poison flooding their waters. Where the home in the valley literally meets a damn dirty prison. This is where there are some literal or potentially literal references here that may speak to the actual literal lived human condition. And this may even be the child. This may even be the child singing. This may be okay, Mom, Dad. We don't know if it's a man singing the song. Okay, Mom, Dad. I'm going to go out and go to these places you've been, and I'm going to actually have my song ready this time and make sure everybody can hear it and see it. And thanks. There's a legacy. Potentially a legacy message to this song. Okay, here's what you've done. Now I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be prepared, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get out there before the rain starts to fall, so I can be ready.
Well, it's really, it ends in a very bleak fashion. What do you do now? I'm going back out. I'll walk, and I don't think there's any other action. I'll tell it and think it and speak it and breathe it and reflect it from the mountain so all souls can see it. But I don't know what it is. What is it? I'll tell it and think. It's really, really strong there at the end. I'll reflect it from the mountain so all souls can see it.
Yeah.
I don't know what that it is, except, that I know the rain is going to fall.
Yeah.
The environment plays a large role in this song, and especially here at the end. It reminds me of what Matt Drudge said when Alex Jones asked him, what do you think's going to happen and blah, blah, blah. And Matt Drudge said, well, I'm a big fan of letting Mother Nature decide. And it feels like there are, the plight of the human condition is something that might do us in here in this Bob Dylan song, but also the environment might as well.
Well,
because
black is none is the number. That's not black people. That's black. That's black. The future. That's negative. That's dark. Black is the color. None is the number. It's very powerful. There is another reference, by the way, to a poet or a writer in here, and how that writer particularly died. The poet dies in the alley, and I'll stand on the ocean until I start thinking. Is that not Virginia Woolf? Wasn't she the one who attached stones to herself and walked into the ocean and drowned?
You know what? That line, I'll stand on the ocean until I start sinking, that's the kind of contempt for the audience that I feel like it's just there just a tiny bit. You endured these 5 verses, this heap of broken images. I've dragged you through. I've shown you things you might not have ever thought of. And then this, the second to last statement in the song is something that's quite obviously going to do you in. I'll stand on the ocean. Oh yeah, you will, Bob. Okay, good luck with that. It's good, of course I'm not going to stick around and watch that, Bob. Bruce Springsteen would never bother telling me he's going to go stand on the ocean until I start.
And he's not standing on the ocean to walk on the water either. There's no kind of God, I'm God or I'm better than you. I'm just gonna walk. I'm gonna sing my song, walk on the ocean, and I'm gonna drown, and it's okay.
Until I start sinking. Really, It's very cute. It's very cute. However, I mean, I wonder what an earlier version of this song looked like. It's an absolute masterwork of folk music, and I've always thought that line deserved. The audience deserves more from that line.
No, I think it's consistent with the. I joked about this the other day, and I stole this from somebody who did a parody of Bob Dylan years ago. But my sense of Bob Dylan certainly in a song like this is, ladies and gentlemen, I've suffered for my music. Now it's your turn. I think there is, you got to work. You're gonna. This is, by the way, I mean, there is another artist who does this and has done it and has been very explicit about it in the way he speaks to how he creates and how he demands the audience listen to his creation, who's Keith Jarrett. I mean, Keith Jarrett has made it very clear how he creates. Everything is improvised. When he does solo concerts, everything is improvised. Everything has to be perfect at the moment that I'm about to create, because I'm doing everything. I'm doing everything from scratch, from my heart at the moment the lights go on and my fingers hit the keys. And you must give me absolute undivided attention, because I am subjecting myself to complete annihilation here. And so if you cough during my concert, I might stop and point my finger at you. And I think there is a very similar tone here, because Bob Dylan, in addition to dealing in music, deals in words and asks the audience to listen to more than just the music. He asks the audience to listen to the words. So there's a very similar thing here to that point, that I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm not going to sing like other singers do. I'm not going to phrase like other people do. I'm not going to write 3-minute songs for you to have a nice single on the radio like other people do. You're going to listen to me, and I'm not making you listen to me. It's your choice. But if you listen to me, you're going to give it attention, and you're going to think about it. And if you don't, that's fine with me too. I mean, I compare the two here because I have read a lot, as you know, about how Keith Jarrett has spoken about the creative process of improvising, and that he likens it to death. That if I am not exposing myself, and I guess with me the audience, to total annihilation, then I'm not getting it right, and I can't produce a good result. And I think there's a sense in here, along with saying that Dylan does this. That it's really a dystopic environment. I'm painting a very negative picture. I'm doing it in very interesting word images and pictures. It's not pretty to listen to. It takes a long time. You might fidget in your seat for 5 stanzas, 7, 8 minutes. But that's what you're getting. And there's a certain amount of integrity to that, to dare your audience to pay attention.
I think. Do you think Bob writes in voices? I mean, this isn't me, Bob Dylan, speaking. It's going to be some fictional person that I'm going to imagine myself as to get these lyrics together. I don't think
know.
He didn't have a blue-eyed son when he wrote "A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall." I don't believe. I'm no Dylan biographer, but I'll pretend to be one here on Trigger Warnings, challenging talk radio featuring John Ross and Chris Smith. It's the Star-Spangled Bob Dylan Rhetorical Analysis Power Hour here, and we've been talking about "A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall," and we're about halfway through the show. It's like we're not going to get to all of the songs that we wanted to.
Well, we're at 1 hour already.
We've been talking for an hour. Well, here's my first song. Are you ready? I am the entertainer. I've had to pay my price. The things I did not know at first, I learned by doing twice. But still they come to haunt me, still they want their say. So I've learned to dance with a hand in my pants, and I let them rub my neck and I write them a check, and they go their merry way. Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't know Bob Dylan wrote that. That's fantastic.
That's a Bob song. Most people don't know that Bob came over to Billy Joel's house one day and was like, "Look, it's a song I've always wanted to write, and you know, I really have played all kinds of palaces and quote laid all kinds of girls, and I can't remember faces. I don't remember names." You drew attention to this song and the Billy Joel catalog. Now, Billy Joel's written about half as many songs. And I would say that Billy Joel has never tried to comment on society to the extent that Bob Dylan did. I mean, now Billy will write about his life, or did. The song The Entertainer is really explicit about the recording industry. It was a beautiful song, but it ran too long, so they cut it down to 3:05, which is exactly what Bob would never put up with, ever.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And for that, I think that's what separates the two, you know? And
No, and I did not bring that up to diss Billy Joel, who I think is magnificent. But I just, you know, I when we were talking about this, I thought about that song and how Dylan didn't do that. I mean, I did see a couple of, for example, Times They Are Changing. I did see there was a TV documentary, I believe, done in the early 60s where Dylan is singing The Times They Are Changing, and he really, and it's kind of the beginning of the show where the credits are rolled, and he did it pretty fast. He got it down to about 2.5 minutes. So he didn't rush it along, and he didn't play a lot of bridges, and he didn't play harmonica interludes and all that. So he did, and he was recorded, you know, he was filmed singing it. He was singing it in a bar, you know, where there are working class men walking around the bar and in this documentary, or this whatever the ship was. So, I mean, Dylan did, for that purpose, knock it down to, you know, kind of trailer length. But I brought that up not to criticize Billy Joel, but to suggest that is what so much of the music business is about, is to be, you know, to conform to standards that are raised by record companies and audiences and radio stations and producers and I just, again, we're playing free association here.
Well, in the time remaining, we really only have time to talk about one more song. If we're gonna get as explicit as we have here on Trigger Warnings, Challenging Talk Radio, the Star Spangled Bob Dylan Rhetorical Analysis Power Hour.
Well, or we can do a part 2 of the show. You know, the remaining the time and attention they deserve.
Stay tuned for part 2 of the Trigger Warnings, Bob Dylan Rhetorical Analysis, Star Spangled Power Hour. But right now,
it could be a telethon.
Well, we don't need to raise money for Bob, though.
It could be a marathon.
The Bob Dylan Relief Fund for those seeking relief from Bob Dylan. All right, well, let's take a look at one more song then, and I think that song should be the song that was featured in The Sopranos. Really, David Chase did such a good job with The Sopranos. I've raved about it here before, and I will right now. The song Gotta Serve Somebody really, really typifies something about the time in which it was written to me. It's not the beginning of Bob's career. It's the 1980s, or perhaps Bob's take on the 1980s. And every verse, like A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, every verse is, lists off people that you, the listener, you, John Ross, might be. You might be an ambassador to England or France. You might like to gamble. You might like to dance. You might be the heavyweight champion of the world. You might be a socialite with a long string of pearls. You're gonna have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed, you're gonna have to serve somebody. Well, it might be the devil or it might be the Lord, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. Now, I don't think it deserves the musical rendition here on Trigger Warnings that the other one did, because it's really not a folk song. I mean, I could play it on the banjo, but it would be even more tedious than what we sat through before. This is kind of one of the Bob Blues numbers, I think. And this idea that you might be these people. You might like to gamble, John Ross. You might like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. Who was the heavyweight champion of the world at the time this song was written?
What year was this written?
That's a good question. Tweet us the answer. No. I believe it was 86, but I'm going to fact check myself right now.
1979, it was released.
There you go.
1979 is the year that Muhammad Ali was defeated by Leon Spinks, I believe. I think the reference is Muhammad Ali, whether he was the champion in those days or not. I think it's clearly a reference to him because Ali's whole reason for being and reason for stepping away from the ring for 3 years was because he was serving something larger than boxing, or at least in his mind, he was serving someone. So I think it's hard to. I mean, it's easy to suggest that it was Muhammad Ali he was referring to.
Right, because Muhammad Ali and his non-service in Vietnam, right?
Mm-hmm. He refused to sign up. He refused to serve. He was suspended. He spent 2.5, 3 years out of the game while the Supreme Court ruled unanimously, by the way, that he had a legitimate reason for not serving as a conscientious objection. So Ali was the title. He regained the title, his third title, in 1978. And he then vacated. He lost the title to Spinks in 1978, and then regained it, I believe, in 1979. So this was. That's dedicated to Muhammad Ali. And it also, by the way, rhymes. The couple, some of them, they rhyme. France, dance, stage, cage. Amazing. What's the purpose of that?
Might be a rock and roll addict prancing on the stage. Might have money and drugs at your command. Women in a cage. You may be a businessman or some high-degree thief. They may call you doctor or they may call you chief. The rock and roll addict, to me, I think it's Lou Reed. The rock and roll animal. It's got to be a Dylan contemporary. And Lou certainly in 79 was prancing on the stage, or had recently.
How about Elvis?
No, I think Bob holds Elvis in a higher regard, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it is Elvis. Certainly could be Elvis. You may be a businessman or some high degree thief. I think that's a different person. They they may call you doctor or they may call you chief. Well, I think that's Dr. Nick, right? Dr. Nicopolis. You know who I'm talking about.
I am stumped.
Elvis's doctor. He died recently.
Okay.
You may be a state trooper. You might be a young Turk. You may be the head of some big TV network. You may be rich or poor. You may be blind or lame. You may be living in another country under another name. What did a young Turk mean in 1979?
The young Turks were kind of the new era, the people, the independent people, the voices, the reformers. That's kind of the generally, specifically, here's the definition. Young Turks were literally the member of the Revolutionary Party in the Ottoman Empire who deposed the Sultan, which led up to the formulation of the modern Turkey. But the modern contemporary definition is a young person eager for radical change to the established order.
So it's the opposite of a state trooper, right?
The inverse of a state trooper, yeah.
And then the third person in that stanza, the head of some big TV network, the movie Network had come out in 76. So I take that to be like Robert Duvall. I wonder if this song is actually about Robert Duvall as Tom Hagen, but also in the movie Network. You're going to have to serve somebody, and there you go.
Well, that's certainly one way to look at it.
No. It's the way to look at it. I think correct.
The reality is that that in the 60s and 70s, as television began to dominate modern society, politics, and popular culture, if you were the head of a big TV network, you were also beginning to look, as they did in the film network, you were starting to look at where the profits and losses were. And it was the era just pre-cable where TV executives started thinking about how the news business needed to be more than just a loss leader, that it was something that they did as kind of a public utility, because nobody made money on network television out of the news, right? Huntley Brinkley, well, by that time it was Roger Mudd, John Chancellor, Tom Brokaw, ABC, Walter Cronkite. These were not money-making propositions. You did the news every night with these esteemed voices who were there because this was kind of the public service of television, because this is where people got their news, but it didn't make money for them. It was more of a brand. And this was the time when the television business was starting to look at, well, can we afford to keep this not making money off news because we're providing a public service? So I think, the idea of programming, are we going to broadcast what the mainstream, what the authorities want, which is the reference to the state trooper or the young Turk, the reform. This is the Smothers Brothers conundrum that had come up during Dylan's heyday. The Smothers Brothers were winning in the ratings, but they were offending people elsewhere. And so what happened to the Smothers Brothers? They had to conform or die, and they decided not to conform. So, I think there are a lot of references here. But, that was the era when we can't just say that we can't just can we afford to keep losing millions and millions of dollars on television news because we're providing a public service?
Well, if that stanza was specifically white collar, Bob tries to talk about blue collar folks in the next one and fails. You may be a construction worker working on a home. You may be living in a mansion, or you might live in a dome. Shout out to all those that have lived in a dome in 2016. You might own guns, and you might even own tanks. You might be somebody's landlord. You might even own banks. It starts off with this blue-collar construction worker, and then it turns into gun ownership as service to someone. And Bob loves to sing about landlords. So the next one after that, it goes back to, well, I don't know if it's blue collar or white collar. You may be a preacher with your spiritual pride. You may be a city councilman taking bribes on the side. You may be working in a barber shop. You may know how to cut hair. You may be somebody's mistress, may be somebody's heir. You know, since I bought my home in Vermont last summer, I have made it a point to move rock out of the brook following a major flood. And that sense of physical activity and accomplishment is critical to keeping the body and mind straight. Annie Dillard said, you know, sometimes she would be writing and she would crank too far and would have to go outside and chop wood because if all you do is read and write all day, you will go insane. And this song to me really rides that line between physical work and intangible work.
Mm.
You know, working in a barber shop, well, is physical work, and it's interesting. What's happening is, you know, I'm cutting hair because it's always going to come back. And then the song descends into Bob's, you know, awesome brand of absurdist nonsense. We're no longer pointing our finger at you, the listener, but instead saying, might like to wear cotton, might like to wear silk, might like to drink whiskey, might like to drink milk. You know, we're taking a step towards Theodore Geisel. You might like to eat caviar, you might like to eat bread, you may be sleeping on the floor, sleeping in a king-size bed. He does wag his finger and say, you know, you might like to eat caviar, and there's no judgment besides the fact that no matter what, you are in the service of, quote, somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord. It seems to be those are the only two choices. No matter how one sees their identity, or whether it's physical or intangible work that's being done, the final frosting on Bob's cake is the last verse that reinforces no matter what you think about me, you are in the service of another, as am I. You may call me Terry, you may call me Jimmy, you may call me Bobby, you may call me Zimmy, you may call me RJ, you may call me Ray, you may call me anything, but no matter what you say, you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed. You're going to have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. My question to you, John Ross, who is RJ or Zimmy? Can you can you give me any context?
Robert Zimmerman. That's his name. He was born Robert Zimmerman. I don't know if his middle initial was J. My guess is that's what it was, but Zimmy is himself. Bobby Zimmerman.
I don't think anyone's ever called him Zimmy. Have you ever called a last name Zimmerman? Have you called that person Zimmy?
Well, I've never known anybody named Zimmerman, but I can imagine when he was a kid, he might have been called Zimmy, or in his fraternity. You know, I told you the story that I used to work with somebody who was in his fraternity with him and was asked to be Bob Dylan's manager. And the guy laughed at him and went into the pharmaceutical business instead. You know, I would imagine that, I mean, Bob Dylan grew up in there, and, you know, we're not going to get to the song today, but the other song, with God on Our Side, speaks specifically to growing up in America's heartland and growing up in, you know, a very 1950s middle-class, safe, suburban, Midwestern environment. So I think in that world, in that context of you know, Minnesota, I think he grew up in a very you know, in a world where boys probably called each other Jimmy or Bobby or RJ. I don't know about Terry, but you know, it all kind of makes sense. I mean,
Zimmy.
I mean, he is talking about growing up having the point of reference in his own life of being like a lot of other people who look like him. You know, I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up in the Midwest, middle class, safe 1950s America.
It reinforces to me that, tongue-in-cheek contempt for the audience, which I find incredibly fascinating and funny and, part of Bob Dylan's genius. But it, again, is what turns people off to him. By the time you get to the end of this song, which is a pretty cool groove, you may call me Zimmy. Really? It's great. It's great. As has been this conversation. You've been listening to Trigger Warnings, Challenging Talk Radio, the Star-Spangled Bob Dylan Rhetorical Analysis Power Hour. And next time, if you liked this...
I don't think Bob Dylan... We can do whatever we want because it's our show. I don't think Bob Dylan would appreciate having been referred to as the Bob Dylan Power Hour, but he did find religion there for a while, so he might take that.
Next week we'll be talking about, or very soon, who knows when the next. We are hot to trot, as they say, on Bob Dylan Rhetorical Analysis. Hopefully, Bob, you'd be welcome to come on this show. Join me here in the desert. Well, and I'll tune up the banjo.
Oh, no, I think you need to sign us off with a song. This is, you are the Bob Dylan cover whiz.
I'm the man. Up on Housing Project Hill, it's either fortune or fame. You must pick one or the other, though neither of them are to be what they claim. If you're looking to get silly, you'd better go back to from where you came. 'Cause the cops don't need you, and man, they expect the same. Ooh, challenging talk radio. All right, join us again, folks, for more Bob Dylan. I'm gonna take my potatoes out to be mashed. John Ross in Chicago. I'll catch up with you soon, man.
And remember, you've got to serve somebody.